Hello, I'm Dominic Walker, JMW's Inside Man. My guest is Charlotte Bealey. Charlotte is an associate solicitor within JMW's Employment Law Department. Now, today is International Women's Day. We celebrate women and the achievements of women right across the globe. But it's great to speak to you, Charlotte, and be able to get an employment lawyer's perspective on things. And I guess my first obvious question to you is, do you think that the COVID pandemic has had an effect on gender equality across the workplace?
Absolutely. COVID has threatened to reverse probably the important gains that we've made in the last decade, as the negative impacts of the pandemic are unfortunately disproportionately being felt by women. Women's jobs are being disproportionately impacted by COVID because of the existing gender inequalities in society, not necessarily within the workplace, and the disruptive impact of the pandemic on service sectors with high levels of female employment. And that means obviously females work in the care sector or the hospitality sector, which was hit really hard by the pandemic. A lot of the businesses closed, so a lot of women lost their jobs. I think the pandemic also amplified the unequal burden of the unpaid care and domestic work carried out by women.
And what can employers do to help, Charlotte?
So employers must work to address the underlying gender inequalities that already exist but have also been exacerbated by the pandemic. They need to close the existing gender pay gaps or look to close them as much as possible, support female progression and leadership in the workplace, and fund employment and business opportunities for women in future growth sectors of the economy, such as the tech sector, which is predominantly led, or the employees within that sector are predominantly male.
And you've given some good guidance there of what employers can do. I guess HR directors will be saying, well, how do we do this? So how can employers do it, and how can you help?
So obviously the employment team here, we can absolutely help. There's a number of ways which we can help. The first one is something that's on the radar, not just because of gender inequality, but because of the pandemic, and that's to do with flexible working. So obviously, as a result of the pandemic, a lot more people are working from home, and more employers have embraced a more of hybrid working models and are allowing the staff to work more flexibly in relation to the working hours and where they work. Now, flexible working can be an important tool, amongst other things, to support employees, often women to a greater extent, who have childcare responsibilities. So employers might just want to, if it's not already on the radar, review the current working practices and determine whether they can accommodate a more hybrid working model to allow employees and women that greater flexibility in relation to the working hours. Secondly, employers need to be a bit more proactive to look at tackling any worrying patterns in relation to the gender pay gap and equal pay. The gender pay gap is a really important tool to allow employers to reflect on the diversity of the workforce. One thing to bear in mind is the gender pay gap reporting is only a requirement for organisations at the moment with 250 or more employees. But there's nothing preventing smaller firms voluntarily producing their own report and assessing existing pay disparities, or even just doing their own audit of their gender pay gap, just so they can see. It's really to give employers a reason to look and audit their pay practices and see if there is anything that they can do to try and reduce that gap. But on obviously today, on International Women's Day, it is important to just celebrate how far we've come in relation to women in the workplace and women's rights, but also appreciate there is still a bit to go.
And it's great, as you say, celebrate and shine a spotlight on as well and raise awareness. Thank you so much, Charlotte. And if you'd like to speak to Charlotte, you can email insideman@jmw.co.uk or call 0161 82 81 999. I'm Dominic Walker, JMW's Inside Man.